Okay.
What a beautiful necklace. That's what I was
Hey, how are you? I haven't had a chance to say hi to you yet.
Oh, hello.
Is it live? No, it's not. I don't hear anything. Dude, can you hear me now? I don't really can hear me. How's that? Good? No? Yes? I usually can hear more.
Yeah.
And please.
Congratulations. And
Karen.
thanks for introducing yourself, because now I can put the name
I
with
like the plus.
the subject matter and stuff.
Right? Not yet. Okay, ready.
Hey everybody! I hope the morning workshop session was a blast and you're up in the air flying now. This is traditionally in the afternoons at Summer Fishtrap we try to provide a little extra something. We always ask our faculty, our instructors, hey, is there something else you want to share or talk about? Craft talks or discussions related to our theme or otherwise. And so this week you'll see in your program that there are a series of these discussions and craft talks, and this stuff was fun. When I asked Karen Auvinen if she was interested in doing something, she said, yeah, I want to do a panel discussion with Ana Maria and Laura. And I said, heck yeah, hired. So the idea of these things is just to be inspired a little bit and to some ways to just think about our theme and being here in different ways. And so you'll hear a lot more about that. For instance, and then after that, there's just what we put some time to explore and really allow us to hang out in the shade, take a nap, go for a swim. Do your homework. And then, of course, we have the open mic readings. We talked about that a little bit before. There's information about it. There's still a few spots left. You can sign up for the whiteboard up at our front desk there at the Fishtrap place. Not the largest of the desk, but where Fishtrap people hang out. So let's get going. Karen Auvinen proposed Written in Land, Our American Story and Place, where they'll discuss how writing has helped them connect to a shared story of the land. And I'll let Karen take it from here, and you folks, we go.
First, thank you. I want to introduce my fellow female panelists. What's the feminine of fellow? Whatever it is. Okay. So first, Ana Maria Spagna, who is right here to my left, is the author of Pushed, Miners, a Merchant, and Maybe a Massacre. Her previous books include Up Lake, Restless Essays of Coming and Going, Reclaimers on Elder Women Restoring Land and Water, Test Ride on the Sunnyland Bus, winner of the River Teeth Literary Nonfiction Prize, 100 Skills You'll Need for the End of the World as We Know It, the middle grade novel The Luckiest Scar on Earth, the chapbook Mile Marker 6. Her work has been recognized by the Society for Environmental Journalists, and she is a 4-time finalist for the Washington State Book Award. After 15 years on Backcountry Cruise, she turned to teaching, lucky us, at Antioch University, Whitman College, St. Lawrence University, and the University of Montana, and now teaches at Western Colorado University, where we are colleagues, and Wenatchee Valley College. She lives in Stehekin, Washington. Her upcoming book, which is something you want to be looking for in the fall of 2026, is Coiled Essays on Urgency and Kinship. And I'm so excited to have her here at Fishtrap.
Thank you.
Also, my colleague Laura Pritchett. Her fiction is rooted in the natural world and celebrates people who live close to it. She's the author of 7 novels, 2 nonfiction books, and editor of 3 anthologies, and her work has been the recipient of the PEN USA Award, the Milkweed Nonfiction Prize, the Will Award, the High Plains Book Award, and several Colorado Book Awards. She's a legend in the state of Colorado, for those of you who don't know. She's also a freelance writer and with publications in the LA Times, the New York Times, Orion, Terrain, the Colorado Sun, Salon, Creative Nonfiction, and more. She holds a PhD from Purdue, and she directs the low residency MFA in nature writing at Western Colorado University, so she's our boss, and we love her. She's the most benign presence in the world. Western Colorado is one of the few graduate programs dedicated to writing about the natural world, which is why we love it. And she has, you can find her at laurapritchett.com, but most interestingly, she's working on a book that's coming out from Bloomsbury about experimental forms in nature writing. So Laura, I'm so glad you're here. And I'll just say, I'm a poet and a mountain woman, and I write creative nonfiction and fiction and poetry. I'm working on a novel, but my book is in there, and it's Rough Beauty, 40 Seasons of Mountain Living, which is about the 10 years I spent living in a wood stove heated cabin on top of a mountain at about 8,600 feet with my dog. And you can read about me in the program. So welcome and thank you for being here. Again, I just want to say a shout out to my Western colleagues here. I was really thrilled when they said, yes, let's talk about this thing. And then yesterday when we were talking about it, we had so many ideas. So I hope that we get a chance to share all of them with you. And also we want to invite you at the end. We'll open it up for questions and comments about questions that our talk raises for you, and also comments about the place of landscape in your own writing. So without further ado. So I wanted to start out by talking about asking the question, how does landscape and place function in your own work and or in the stories that you tell?
I think land is everything in the work, in what I write. It's where my work comes from. And I'll give a short little origin story that I was the kid who always wanted to be a writer from the time I was really, really small. And then sometime in middle school, or, as happens to young people, I lost that spark. I had lost my father. I was probably grappling with my own sexual identity, though I didn't know it at the time. So I dropped it for a while. And long story short, I graduated from college, was lost, ended up by the grace of the goddess volunteering in Canyonlands National Park. And almost immediately when I woke up the first morning that I was in Canyonlands, 2 things happened. I knew I was in the right place, and I wanted to start writing again. And so that sense of what the land means to me and what words mean to me are entirely intertwined and have changed a lot over time, but they make me feel part of this larger natural world more than human world, and also the human world. The last thing I'll say before I pass it to Laura is that I thought it was my own discovery, right? That moment I woke up in Canyonlands, it was the land and me. And when I looked back on my life, I saw that writers had been showing me the way all along. From Willa Cather to Joan Didion to James Baldwin, they were writing of place, and they were filling my heart with that connection between land and words that I hope I've continued in my own work. So, yeah, Laura.
I love hearing that story. Similarly, I wrote in my diary at age 7 on the very first page. Some of you know this because I've shared it before, but I will be a writer someday, just like Laura Ingalls Wilder. Spelled R-I-T-E-R. I was 7. So, but I was clear. I loved books. I loved picking up a book, and I read a lot of Madeleine L'Engle and sci-fi and fantasy, and was in love with those worlds. But young adult books too. But in middle school, my wonderful librarian at the middle school had a contest, and the prize was $100, and I needed the $100 to get a sleeping bag because my brother told me he'd take me camping if I could get my own sleeping bag. So I had to win. And so the contest was you had to read 10 books and then, answer questions about them. and one of them was Grapes of Wrath. And I read it, and I thought, here's like people that are like feel familiar. My mom's family came from Nebraska and had been part of the Dust Bowl, and and I thought, oh, I love sci-fi and fantasy, but I want to write true stories about the people I know. And around the same age, at 7, we had moved to a farm, and I always joke, but it's kind of true. I had 6 brothers, and I was like trying to escape. Like they were constantly tackling me. Like we're a very wrestly family. And so I would just grab a book and run outside. And so, and sit by the river or in a field or on a log. I had all these, depending on my mood, I had all these locations. So to my mind, nature and being outside and writing and journaling and reading, they just are like in the same neural pathway in my brain. And likewise, I went on to study Writers of the Land. That was my PhD dissertation. For various reasons, I was stuck in Indiana, but I kept writing about the West, and nobody knew who I was talking about. But my whole dissertation was on place-based writers of the American West and how stories had evolved. I thought they were getting more sophisticated and mature and interesting, and away from the John Wayne, single stoic cowboy riding off into the sunset. And so, all of my studies have been about how can writing evolve? How can we speak to place, but in more kind of nuanced and interesting ways. And as you so eloquently put it, people have been doing it all along, but I entered into the conversation and hope to add a little bit to it.
We have similar PhD experiences. I was in UWM in Milwaukee. My only time I lived in the Midwest, I've been in the West my entire life, and I was like a stranger in a strange land. And believe me, the people in the Midwest were like, "What are you?" Mm-hmm. Because here I am, this ebullient, exuberant person, and people were very tight-lipped there. Anyway, so I'm writing a dissertation on. My dissertation was creative, but the books that I chose to read were all about really what I was calling how landscape gives rise to character. I was interested in how landscape is a container for the stories that we tell, and how do you characterize people who live, in the, on the high plains versus people who live in the mountains, and what is it about that while avoiding stereotype, but what is the sensibility that rises out of your relationship with landscape? So I was really interested in this idea of writers of place, and so I think we might share a love for Rick Bass and an admiration for, and I was really in love with his stories, and this kind of deep Montana, small town places that he's writing about, which I'm going to read a part of a story that's kind of like that this week. So I was interested always in how landscape really stories the people that live there. And and in all of my, whatever I'm writing, landscape is always kind of the ground, the bedrock of all of that stuff. I would, since you've already touched on it, I would like to just invite you to expand more on the writers that have influenced you.
I just want to say I did win the $100, and I got a red sleeping bag, which I still own. It was so raggedy.
And she just keeps bragging about it. She never stops. No.
Is it one of those sleeping bags that they used to have, the Coleman ones that are just stuffed with cotton or polyester or whatever? They're not really.
No, it was one of the very first, lighter weight. It was amazing.
See what I mean about the bragging?
See, look,
yeah.
I'm a little, yeah, okay.
I'm just
good.
a braggart.
Yeah.
At first I was reading what was on the shelves of the family home, which were, Flannery O'Connor and Willa Cather and Mari Sandoz, where I sit on the board of the Mari Sandoz Society now, if anyone wants to know more about Mari Sandoz's work. But I think what was on the shelves was some very place-based writing. And then, I just went on various explorations, and Kittredge and Bass and Ellen Malloy and Ellen Waterston, all the writers here, I got introduced to Kim Stafford's work, and, it just, this whole long list. And one thing I'm happy about is that anytime I've traveled, I've made an effort to read the literature of that place. Mm-hmm. So I spent 6 months studying Maori and New Zealand writers, and wherever I'm at, I'm trying to expand my notion, because I know that my first and deep love was the American West, and that's wonderful and very rich, but needs expansion.
I have to. There used to be a little gathering of nature writers in the Pacific Northwest. I can't remember what we called ourselves, but we would meet at the experimental forest, at Andrews Experimental Forest in Oregon. And one of the ways, what was it called, Kim? Blue Riders, exactly. Blue Riders, Blue River Riders. And one of the traditions there that I adored, that I've tried to carry on, is that there would be a campfire, and everyone would just stand around it and just say the names of like the lineage that we come from, the writers who have moved us from Ursula K. Le Guin to Toni Morrison to James Baldwin to Edward Abbey, right? These names would, and as they went, somebody would be like, oh yeah, that reminds me of so-and-so. It would go on and on and on, and I love that sense of us being part of a lineage. And in that spirit, with Kim sitting here, I have to say that I grew up outside of Los Angeles, which is way different from Oregon, where I went to college. I was wowed by the trees. I was wowed by the Pacific Northwest. And at the University of Oregon, I discovered the work of Kim Stafford, and who I found out had gone to school there too, and gone to the Honors College there too a few years before me. And so I wrote my undergraduate thesis about Kim's book, Having Everything Right, when it feels like full circle to be here with him. As part of this long lineage. But that said, like my influences and even the influences about the land are so broad. I think that James Baldwin is one of the writers who has influenced me most in terms of the land, the urban landscape he comes from, the culture he comes from, the culture we all come from, and the way he challenges us to expand our notion of our culture and to question the values we come from. The same with Joan Didion, who has a very different sensibility from mine, but she comes from California, where I grew up, and questions that California and brings that landscape to life on the page. All that time in the desert, I was with Mary Austin and with Leslie Marmon Silko and the indigenous voices, Choi Harjo and Linda Hogan. And so I'm looking for that lineage, and I wish we were around the fire with all of us calling out names, because everyone that any one of you said, I would say, yeah, them too, or I need to read that person. But it's rich, it's part of it. When I first started teaching, I was teaching just English composition, and they always talked about you have to tell the students to write to an audience, right? Know who your audience is. And I was always kind of baffled by that. And I had this wonderful teacher who said, your audience is all the readers and writers who have ever been. That's your audience. And suddenly I felt like, yeah, that's it. Right?
We should start a new fish trap tradition. I love that. Let's have we can't have a campfire, but whatever. And shout our ancestry into it. I love that. I have to say that you mentioned Leslie Silko. I was so deeply in love with Leslie Silko and Linda Hogan, who I had the privilege to study with at the University of Colorado. And I was in love with the kind of ways to look at landscape that they opened up for me, and that like for Leslie Silko, story lives in the land. It actually lives here at this rock or at that river, piece in the river. This story lives there. And I was so interested in how that expanded my view of what landscape as a container meant, that it actually led me back to my own kind of looking at my own ancestors from Finland, and I'm deeply entrenched now in this kind of research about them, and about the kind of place-based stories that live in that mythology, and that's kind of coming into my work now. So it's interesting how, like, just shouting out one writer can lead you on this journey that takes you on this whole circuit that actually ends up enriching your own writing and enriching the kinds of stories that you tell.
Have you gone to Finland? Have you gone?
I'm going next year.
Yeah.
I'm planning a trip. So I'm really excited. Right now, the argument in my family is my partner wants to go when it's cold, because he's an ex-Nordic skier, and I want to go during midsummer, which is the big Nordic celebration. So anyway.
You should win.
I'll win. So then I just want to circle back to this idea of landscape functioning in the work that you write, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or poetry. Can you give an example, or can you think of an example of how, something that's memorable about how landscape functions in one of your pieces?
I think.
Gotta think about it.
I mean, I read a lot like you, Karen, living in a small place for a long time. That place permeates who you are. And so the Stehekin River finds its way running into every story that I write, right? It doesn't matter what I start writing about, here comes the river, it's going to come running right through. And so it functions as sort of a grounding, right? As a pulling me back to who I am, to where I'm from, to have that river come through. There was a time where I'd be like, river away, enough. Like, I'm writing about the civil rights movement. But at some point I was like, no, I write about the civil rights movement with the river running through it, literally, because that's who I am, and that's not just makes my work, but what makes my idea of living in this world
It's like
real.
your sensibility.
It's a
Yeah.
sensibility. It's who you are, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
mountains are in everything that you write. How do you do that writing about Finland?
So I have a. How do I do that? It is in everything I write, and so I have this collection of short stories. Is about living in a small mountain town, and the way it manifests most. Kind of dramatically is in the voice of the town. So I have several stories in that collection that are written from the point of view of the town, talking about events that are happening in the town. And so it's a we, and they're actually observing, the goings on and the crazy thing that mountain people do. And I honestly think it's just the crazy things that people who live in small communities do, because it's like a fishbowl. You all see each other, and you all know each other, and you all tolerate each other for the most part. Much better than, if there's bigger populations. So I'm talking about a little mountain town called Jamestown, which is on the Front Range of Colorado. And there's 300 people that live in the town, actually less than that. They had a flood a few years ago. So some of the town went down the creek. And so there's about 265, 70 people now. And then another 300 who live on top, which is 1,500 feet higher, which is kind of like the mountain equivalent of the suburbs. And there's one stop sign, one post office, and the Jamestown Mercantile. And that is the town center. Everything that happens, it happens at the Merc. So all the celebrations, all the weddings, all the drunken nights, all the anything that happens, marriages. Exactly, mourning and grieving. People get divorced. People, all kinds of stuff happens because of the shenanigans in town. And so a lot of my stories have this kind of third, this kind of we town plural who are telling the story because I experience them collectively, which feels like the most authentic way to kind of write about them. And that voice really literally rises up in this canyon that has a little creek running through it. And two hills. I mean, it's like this very small space, and it's just there almost isn't room for kind of individual voices. It's just the town's voice, and so that's my expression of that landscape.
Love it. And similarly, most of my books have been set in some fictitious town that looks much like Bellevue or LaPorte, Colorado, and the farm that I grew up on, and. So I think you see its presence everywhere, and you can also see my development as a writer as I tried to learn its greater history, more than I had been taught in the Colorado history class in 5th grade. I tried to expand my understanding of the place and then be in relationship more deeply and with the non-human or more than human creatures that live upon it. So it's been a growing thing, and I have also narrated some stories from the point of view of the town itself. Most specifically in my new book, Playing with Wildfire, which is a fire is coming into the town. And so it is a story about place. And the reason I told it experimentally is because it manifested in my writing that way, because that's how we experience a wildfire, right? Like stories, embers flying all over and crazy chaos. And it wasn't one standard narrative arc. It came to me in bits. And parts of it are narrated by the mountain or the fire or the aspen trees on the mountains. So I guess early on I fell in love with Winesburg, Ohio. I mean, we all know that classic. And I've always been interested in what does a town and what does a place say? And for me, it's like where I grew up and where I live now. And we have one Grange and a shoemaking shop, and the post office. And that's it's something about the smallness of it that makes it more intense, I think, because this is what you have, and these are the neighbors you have, and that's gonna have to work.
I was thinking, there's so many things I was thinking when you were talking that I want to ask you about, but one of the things is you shouted out Winesburg, Ohio, which was also hugely influential to me. And I was thinking about when I was in grad school, I don't know how it was when you were in grad school, but there was a poo-poo-ness about provinciality and regionalism. And I remember I made my whole project in graduate school. I was the editor-in-chief of our literary review, which was Cream City Review. And I made a whole project, which we got forwarded to the NEA competition for this, to get funding for this issue, which was called Landscape Close-Up Panorama. And my whole crusade was to reclaim regionalism and local writing as something valuable. Because when I was in grad school, it wasn't seen as valuable. It was seen as quotidian and not worthy of the big New York publishing companies. And I was like, well, screw that. So there was a question that I've forgotten, but I just want to talk about this idea of I feel like what's happening with nature writing now is to say local places are an important part of the tapestry. That we don't have this idea anymore that regionalism is something to be looked down upon.
Amen. If the intro to my Playing with Wildfire, I take this very topic on and complain about this idea that provincial, it's like in seeing something deeply and keeping it specific, you actually expand it more. And I go on to quote Nan Shepherd and all these, I just... I take on that whole idea, and we've all had the experience of being called a local writer, and it's said with a derogatory leaning, right? And so, and New York, we've all battled trying to get New York to notice writers outside of New York and stories outside of New York. So it's evolving and developing, but there's still that sense, and yeah, I'm with you. I just want to redefine or reposition that.
And punch somebody in the nose.
Yeah.
I'll jump in with a yes and, but before we do, just in case anybody's missing these references, Winesburg, Ohio is Sherwood Anderson,
yes.
And it's linked stories from what era? Come on, somebody help me.
My PhD.
100 years ago, or more. And then The Living Mountain, Nan Shepherd. If you haven't read it, just leave right now. Just go find it and read it, and you'll get all you need.
Or better yet, listen to it, because it's so beautiful.
So the prose is outrageously beautiful about the Scottish Highlands. I am also a writer from, we can play small town competitiveness because mine has only 80 people. But I come from a small place, and I think it's important to acknowledge small places. I also think we're part of we're entangled with everyone, right? We're part of a web, and we know that our world is changing. Climate change is upon us and woven into who we are. The wonderful Western writer Charmin Apt Russell, also drop everything, go read Charmin Apt Russell. She says climate change should be in everything that we write, like every single thing that we write. And why? Because it's in every day of our lives. It's not that we have to get up and say climate change is real. It just is real. It's just part of who we are. It's part of how my tiny town is changing. It's part of how your tiny town is changing. It's part of how Jamestown is changing. So that is part of it, and the more than human experience of that is part of it. Also, history. The story that I was taught about America and about Stehekin, where I live, and about Riverside, where I grew up, was so incomplete. And at some point I realized, I've always thought I'm no expert. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a historian. But I can write, and I can go look up stories. And so I've written 3 books that are wildly not about Stehekin, one about the early civil rights movement, one called Reclaimers, about indigenous people, elder women reclaiming land and water in California. And it just took getting into my car and driving around and talking to people and hearing their stories and writing them down and weaving them with my own experience of the land. And then similarly, my most recent book, I promise this isn't all just log rolling, promoting myself. There's a point to it. Pushed is about Chinese miners in the inland Northwest where I live. I had lived there 30 years before I ever knew there had been Chinese people in the inland Northwest. And when I started researching, I learned that when the first non-Indigenous people came to the inland Northwest, there were 3 times as many Chinese as white people. And how we didn't know this and how we don't know what happened and why they left are just questions, right? They're questions that we can engage because we're writers and weave them in to the stories of the land that we're telling.
I think it's so important to I do think that thing of questioning your places and questioning the history of the place and the stories of the place, because like if you live in my little mountain town, you just accept the fact that there were miners and they were and there were politicians, miners and politicians, and they were men.
Right.
And if you're a woman, you were either a really uptight, puritanical wife, or you were a floozy. And every year the town would celebrate this by putting on plays about that, in which you could, try out for the parts. And I'm like, okay, I could be a prude or a hooker. And anyway, so all this to say, I think it's really interesting what happens when you start to actually kind of try to find the stories that are embedded in the place. And then not only just about the people, but as Ana Maria said, the more than human world, which I think is one thing I'd love to hear more about, because that's I think one of the most exciting things that's been happening in nature writing is this idea of really putting people really understanding that it's putting our arms around the more than human world, or I don't even know, that's not even it. It's like, open your arms wide to the more than human world. And writing about the more than human world is part of another concept I want to talk about later, which is restoring the land. But I'd love to hear about this. I know, Laura, you wrote about it in your wildfire book, which is like you said, the point of view of the mountain. But if you have any other thoughts you want to share about the more than human world as a part of these landscapes and places.
Well, yeah, but my answer is just going to point right back to Ana Maria. I had been afraid perspective for a long time because I've seen and heard it done badly, and it scared me, and I didn't want to be disrespectful. But on the other hand, then Ana Maria was teaching a class called Embodying the Non-Human, and I looked at her syllabus, and I thought, wait a minute, I would really like to try to start writing from a place of respect and humility about the stories that are beyond the human and more than human, and give voice when and where I can. And it's been a huge new development for me. And also just having my human characters be in different relationship with, use different pronouns, use different words. Like, I just want to start unpacking all the ways in which we can break down this barrier of human, not human. And anyway, it comes from her syllabus. So I'll let you answer this question.
Syllabi are for sharing, right? That's for people to read and be inspired by. I'll say exactly what Laura said, that I was a quote nature writer for many, many years, and I wrote about rivers and mountains and work and deserts and the sky and the clouds, and never about animals, because I had been taught so firmly never to anthropomorphize, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I can't write about it scientifically because I'm not a scientist. I can't anthropomorphize. What can I do? And I realized exactly what Laura was saying. Like, I live in relationship. They're my kin. I wake up and I spend time with the robins and with the wrens before I spend time with my wife, right? And so why can't I acknowledge those relationships? Why can't I bring those relationships in? And I'm so eager for people who are good at it to embody those voices, to write from that perspective. That is not my particular avenue. I write about relationship with them. I'm very interested in the use of he and kin pronouns, as Robin Wall Kimmerer has suggested, instead of it for the non-living. Mm-hmm. I'm also interested in expanding those to be human too. Why do we have different pronouns than our other kin? So lots of fun experimenting to be done. And it reminds me of that era when we were all in school, when everybody would talk about these great books where the land is actually a character. What about the other beings in the land? So we're moving along.
I'm also inspired by C. Marie's idea that C. Marie Furman, who is also a colleague of ours, who talks about dropping the. So it's bear instead of, it objectifies the bear. So talking about bear, fox, or coyote. which is something I have been working to do, and then also not using it and also using pronouns, the human pronouns that we use. Yeah. It's interesting. For me, it's still a very kind of precarious balance that I'm trying to figure out, because my whole body wants to go to this, what is for me a very deeply spiritual experience, and it makes me nervous to write about that stuff, which is like the most revealing thing I could say about myself. This is what I believe to be true.
Just a pro tip: if something makes you really nervous and you feel precarious about writing it, please write it.
Yeah.
That's a signal.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to shout out another writer as you were talking. Robert McFarlane is doing some really amazing work with in this genre, and he has a new book called Is a River Alive, which I found to be transformational. And so I highly recommend it. But I usually try to sneak something of his in every single class that I teach, because plus the man, he takes nouns and he uses them as verbs. It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And his language is so gorgeous. So big shout out to Robert McFarlane. Anyway, so I want to talk a little bit more about restoring the land. I have no idea what I'm asking. I just want you to spitball here. But I just feel like there's this idea that has to do with the things that we're talking about. We're restoring places and restoring landscapes, and what does that mean to you?
I think it means everything we've been talking about, bringing the more than human in, bringing those other lesser-known histories into the story of the land, bringing the changes that are happening all around us into the stories of the land, to interrogating the stories that we've inherited and what they say about colonialism and other things, racism, sexism. As you interrogate them, write something new. Write a new way. Restory that land. Right? Don't just say, look at that land. It's been destroyed. You go out with seeds and you replant. Right? And you see what grows.
Oh, I like that. And the only thing I'd add to that wonderful answer is we can restory in terms of subject matter, like giving a fuller history, trying to give a fuller history of a place name or who lived upon it. But we can also adapt our technique and our form, and I guess that's why I'm interested in this book I'm working on about experimental or innovative form and technique in nature writing. So I'm really interested in non-standard narratives, although I love those too, like a typical plot for a novel or a memoir, and interested in hybrid mixes and flash and what's called hermit crabs and essays and epistolary work and episodic work. I'm just really interested in ways that we can reinvent storytelling. I mean, writing is always going to evolve, and it should. And I'm really, and it can be more, I feel like it's more collaborative now. Like we're trying to restory these places from different angles, and I find it really exciting.
And I just want to jump in real quickly, and because you talked about collaboration and the idea of inviting more voices into the storytelling, and making space for those voices. And I mean, people who decide to edit an anthology just to bring more voices together so we hear literally more stories of the land. Also great.
This reminds me of how I was taught to write a novel, which was like and how I was taught to write fiction. My PhD is in fiction writing, and that you have to, like, there has to be this kind of, there's a narrator, whether it's God or it's one person, and there's a certain point of view, and you can never switch out of it, and don't do that. And there was all these rules about you can't do that, and I had professors telling me, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. And I started to I saw it first in indigenous writers. So I'm thinking of, I'm a woman of a certain age, so my name recall is really bad right now. But Ray Youngbear's first novel, which is written in, wants to assimilate, or not assimilate, wants to be like what the oral tradition is. And so he writes it all in poetry. It's poetic form, so it's line break. And then Leslie Silko's Storyteller, which is these kinds of, or Scott Momaday's The Way to Rainy Mountain, which is 3 sections: history, mythology, and personal narrative. And together, each chapter with one of those paragraphs forms something that is larger than the whole. And Leslie Silko has photographs and short stories and poem fragments. And that blew my mind that you could write a book like that. And I'm in the trench warfare with a novel right now. And and I'm finding that this idea that I made the most difficult task I could possibly make, which is it's historical. I don't write historical fiction. And it's set in 1933, and then it's set again in 2005, and a little bit in 1976, and it has 3 different points of view right now. It may have more. And so there are all these voices telling this story, which is about what is inherited through generations when something happens to one set of ancestors, and it continues to happen. And in my case, this is based on my Finnish ancestors. When they were forced to flee Finland in the 18th century because of famine, a quarter of the population died in that famine. And so people came because, this is the immigrant story, right? They came because they could not survive. But what happens to a people when they are uprooted from the land that they've lived on for generation after generation after generation, and the stories that inform who they are, are ripped from them in some ways. And my Finnish ancestors, first they were converted by the Lars Levi Lestadius, which is the very conservative arm of the Lutheran Church, like no drinking, no singing, no flowers, no anything. And so there was that dislocation, and then they came to America. And these are people from lakes and hills and deep forests, and they go to the border between North Dakota and South Dakota, which is as flat and open, and there's a few little pondy lake things there, but it's just like the most different. So what happens, and what happens to those people, and what got passed on to the generations that came after that. And I'm finding that this kind of polyvocal way of telling the story is the way to get closer to what is actually happening for these people. So I think it is really an exciting time to be writing, because I think form is evolving, and thanks in large part to people who have been marginalized. So I always look to Indigenous writers. That's where I first saw this kind of really not experimenting for experimental's sake, but experimenting what's considered experimental that rises up from a tradition and a knowledge and a knowing with the landscape. Mm-hmm. Oh, that was a long answer. Okay. All right, we have a few more questions. So I guess what I want to ask is, we already touched on how nature writing is kind of evolving, but how does that, my initial response for this panel was that when somebody asks me, about our American story, I'm like, it's land. It's not, it's land. That's the shared thing that we have. That's the thread that we have in common. And so I guess I want to say, is there a new American story? What could it be? Are we telling it? Is it in nature writing?
It better be.
Yes.
Yeah,
the answer is yes.
I mean, there's a new human story, right? There's a new human story being told in terms of the climate, in terms of our ecological moment. So there's that, right? That's being retold. There's also, the continuing story of inclusion and exclusion, and the whole label of American that we are grappling with right now, and grapple with over and over and over in our history, right?
Ad nauseum.
Ad nauseum, and yet real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Please.
which still needs way more further development. Like, it's not like we achieved some kind of great wisdom
No.
yet. We've got a ways to go.
Do we ever? I don't think we really ever arrive. It's like a
No.
process of becoming endlessly.
But I mean, it's wonderful, and it's idealistic, and it's real that our story is in the land. But our story is also in stories, right? The story that we tell ourselves, that we're a nation of immigrants, that we are a free people, All of those things are stories that we tell. And as storytellers, our job is to retell those stories, right? Find a better way to tell those stories with all the complication therein. And I mean, I'm preaching to the choir both with all of you who are writers and with the two women sitting with me, because Laura, your novels have always done this, right? They've always grappled with Americanness and what it means to be American, whether you wanted to use that word or not. You know, I'm thinking of Red Lightning and bringing the water to the people crossing the desert and what that meant for those characters. I don't know if you want to speak to how intentionally that, or how that comes to you as part of a story that's about people
Well,
in
yeah,
Colorado.
just that I hope we keep retelling the story and telling better and truer stories, because we have some people who've been trying, but a lot of the stories that America listens to are still highly problematic.
Yeah.
And I remember once my friend Aaron Abeda complimented my writing. He said, "Oh, what you're doing is revamping the American Western," meaning like, you know, stepping away from cliches and stereotypes. But I was just in conversation with him, and if you look at what's showing on Netflix and a lot of the popular books at the grocery line handout, it is still quite stereotypes and based on certain prioritizing certain stories over others, right? And with a white male protagonist there's a minority as a sidekick, right? Like, it's infuriating to me how much we haven't really moved along. But I'd like to think that we keep telling truer, better, deeper stories, and that's really our job. To include more, and some of that for me has been telling stories that are a little bit out of my lived experience, but I did, you know, I did due diligence, and I came from a place of humility, of research and that sort of thing, and I did know some, like, and she's speaking about Red Lightning, one of my novels about water, or leaving, and Three Keys too, leaving water on the border, which is something I've done to help to hopefully assist in people, you know, dying of thirst. So, like, I don't know, we'd need to tell more complex, complicated stories and keep doing it.
And I think it is the way we reconfigure stories, right? Like you were talking about the things you were taught about novel writing.
Yeah.
That one of the reasons I left fiction writing was because what I was taught about fiction writing was that there was one thing a story needed: conflict, right? And it has to have a conflict, and it can be a conflict of man versus man,
Yep.
man versus nature, or man versus himself.
Yeah.
Now, first off, I'm not a man, right? So we had that as a problem. But really, that wasn't it for me. It was the sense that there had to be a conflict. And at some point, again, I owe a wonderful mentor for taking me aside and saying, you know, you can just think of it as connection, that every story has to be a connection between humans and humans, or a human and themselves, or human and nature. It changed everything, right? It changed everything in the way that I wrote and thought about my relationship with place and with others. So, you know, it just sometimes it is just rethinking.
It is rethinking. It's also, but I also think I want to honor the power of story, and so I want to put Taylor Sheridan on a shelf for right now. I want to set aside what we're watching on TV versus what we're writing about in books for just a second, because I teach pop culture, and so I think about what's in the zeitgeist right now and why it's in the zeitgeist. But I think the power of story, the power of our narratives are so important. And if all of us just think about a story we've been telling about ourselves for so long, and then one day we wake up and we realize that's not the story. Wait a minute, it's different. Wait a minute, it's different. And so so story has this incredible power because we cast spells with stories, and and whether we're telling those stories about ourselves or our communities or the people who raised us or where we come from or whatever it is, they have incredible power. And I think to honor that power and realize that you are putting something out in the world that is like magic, that can affect other people, that can seep into people's lives. And so to honor the power of story like that, and so then honor this generative power of what we can do with story, what is possible if we get out of the way and let the story kind of come through us, which is the best way to arrive at that tale, is awesome. I do think there are narratives in the dominant culture that reflect a certain twisted, dark place in our society, that one that has to basically, I'm sorry, but what comes to mind is it's like a zit, and it just needs to be popped. But it's coming to the surface. But it is reflected in the popularity of certain narratives, like the return of the Western, which I never in my entire life thought I would ever see. But it represents a certain kind of brand of masculinity, which is a myth, but it has some appeal in our culture. And so, but I want to separate out what we're doing with our writing versus what's happening in popular culture, which, like as I say, just reflects where part of the American soul is spending some time right now. So, I think I want to open it up. Yeah. We'd love to take questions, and also we'd love to hear what you have to share about your own experience of place or land in your writing. So, yes.
Can I chime in real quick?
Yeah.
I didn't, just so you know, I wasn't dissing Midwestern literature. I just found it weird that I was getting my PhD there and not maybe, say, in Montana, just because my focus was so much on Western. Oh, I'd like to think that, and that begs the whole question of, we're saying nature writing, but what does that mean? And people have very different interpretations of what that phrase means. My definition is pretty broad, which is many of us are celebrating the natural world, whether it's a cornfield or a wheat field or a mountainscape or a cityscape or a urban landscape. And we're putting squiggly black marks on a page, which is writing. So that is nature writing, and it's, inclusive of all the genres, and it's trying to capture, though, the power of place. So that's my definition of nature writing. Or place is fundamental to the sensibility of the writing in some way, including the Midwest and including urban areas and that sort of thing. So my just personal interest, because I grew up in the West, I focused on authors who spoke to my lived experience of mountains and in Nebraska too, just because that's where my family came from. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but a few thoughts on it.
Every place gets to be a place, right?
Yeah,
Every place
absolutely.
gets to be a place. And it reminds me that I was talking with a group of people about where can you even find nature writing? Like, is that a section in the bookshelf, or where do you find it? And we all agreed you really find it in the regional section. So if I go to a bookstore in St. Louis, Missouri, I go to the regional section, and I'll find stuff that's actually about that place. I grew up in Riverside, California, which is outside of Los Angeles. And seemed to me when I left it, wanting to be part of this nature, that it was no place. Like, it was just suburbia. It was just, there was no nature in Riverside, California. And I was probably 20 years later that I discovered there was a rich history of indigenous and non-indigenous writing about this place that's full of nature that I just didn't know. I lived in the suburbs and went to the swimming pool. And when I wanted to write for High Country News, which is about the West, they said, well, you can't write about Riverside. I was like, well, it says West, it's real West. but it wasn't West like Mountain West. And so there are all these little cliques. I hear what you're saying, and I honor that. But every place is a place. Write about your real place, whatever your real place is.
Yeah.
And I guess to that I would add, even so, the nature writer David Gessner has in terms of trying to reclaim this idea of nature as this kind of wild, untrammeled space. He has a book about floating down the Charles River in order to kind of find his wild place. He's floating by people's backyards. Of course, and it's David Gessner, so he's guzzling beer the entire time. And and so there's that. And then also, Robert McFarlane has a book called The Wild Places, and he spends the entire book looking for the wild places, only as Robert McFarlane can do, because the dude is an athlete, and he just goes up here and down there and across there and does all these kinds of things. And in the end, he realizes that the wild places are these places that resonate with him. And so he says, a backyard that I grew up when I was a little kid. And he lists his wild places, which is an activity I love to do with my students. Like, what are your wild places? What are the places that, like, resonate with you? They're not the most pristine, remote, untrammeled places. They are the places that speak to your spirit. So I do think that, I think you're hearing, I mean, for me, it's a Western bias because I did literature of the American West when I was in doing my graduate degree, and so I'm really schooled in Western writers. And but when I was living in the Midwest, I heard of one or two.
Are you calling?
Oh yes, go ahead. Hi.
I was wondering if you could define the American soul a little clearer.
We were wondering if you could.
We hear a lot about nature. I want to hear about the
Oh,
American soul.
what's that de Tocqueville quote? Of the American soul is a something brutal and a, oh God, what's the, come on. look at-
Somebody's got to know de Tocqueville here.
Come on, de Tocqueville has a really brutal and a murderer or something. I don't know. There's a great de Tocqueville quote about the American soul. I feel like we can't. I think this is where the problem of a kind of an American identity comes in, because it historically has meant one kind of very narrow range of traits. And so I think that I feel like we're in a period in our country's history where we're redefining that and are reimagining that. And I don't necessarily think it's going to happen tomorrow or maybe in the next decade. I hope to see it in my lifetime, but I feel like Laura's children will see it in their lifetime. Yes, over here.
Karen, go ahead.
Yes, you this time.
What do you think about the notion that the land we grow up in, that we train especially as children, we get the minerals of that land in our body?
Well, what do we think about the notion of the land we grow up in, that we carry those minerals in our body? I'm going to trouble this.
I ate a lot of dirt, so.
I ate dirt too. Oh my God, I so ate dirt. My family, my dad was in the Air Force. And so one of the things about this that I've been worrying about in my writing is this idea of, this is why I gravitated toward place, because I never thought I had one. And so I love that idea. I love it. I don't know if I can claim it as my own.
I love it too. I'd love to hear what like science says about like our makeup's like slightly different. I don't know.
Yeah,
There is.
And you carry your ancestors' minerals
definitely
with
carry
you
your
too, right?
ancestors.
So there's all of that as well. Yeah.
Well, then I'm signing on because I definitely believe you carry the ancestors with you. So archaeological genetics. Who knew? I love it. What do you think about that? The woman who asked me the question.
I think that we carry the land with us.
Mm.
And that's one of the reasons that we have longing to go back. There is history of healing that brings us back to the places that we that is our longing. When sometimes the people have a longing to go to their place.
But then what land? In this generation or the previous generation? Where do you count? I mean, that's interesting. It starts to become a hall of mirrors for me very quickly. I love that. Other questions?
I
Yes.
want to think on that. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about
Right.
waiting for documents. What are your thoughts?
I love stories that anthropomorphize, it turns out.
Thank
right?
you.
Right? I mean, come on. They're fabulous stories. It's our imaginations. We're human beings. Imagination is what we have. We're imagining our kin. We're imagining. We do it in fiction all the time. Laura sits here and makes up what characters are thinking, for a living. Why can't we make up what animals are thinking? There's danger, of course. There's danger in making them seem less fragile than they are, for example. Making wolves seem like villains is problematic because then we turn around and shoot them if it's not obvious. But other than that, like teaching, I started teaching embodying the non-human during the pandemic, and it was the greatest source of joy for me and my students to revisit those stories like Watership Down, to revisit stories where animals are doing things and thinking things and
Charlotte's Web.
I think
Charlotte's
one of the
Web.
things that is a danger is when we use that anthropomorphizing to uphold these kinds of stereotypes that are not serving us in our culture. Like the dominant male, the passive female, kind of thing that, and so when we start to use the stereotypes to kind of reflect the things that we have believed for too long back to us, then I think it is a problem. But I'm on the boat with Ana Maria. What the heck?
So let's just not do that as
Yeah,
writers.
right.
Just
Yeah.
make sure that you're coming from a place of information, like do some studying on the non-human life you're describing, and stay away from stereotypes and tell a better story.
And to also be aware of your own bias and your own blindnesses. Like, so there's bias, but then there are these blindnesses, these things that we kind of like put on others unwittingly. And to really try to be sensitive to that, I think is really important, to not, just not to go over that tired ground over and over again, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, over here on the edge.
Thanks. Everything you guys are saying resonates so much for me, and I'm a wildlife biologist who works on, I think we met Steve years ago, I was on a bear study, but I am writing about the restoration and recovery of wild predators, and I love this idea of restoring being such an important part of that, because to me the unifier in all of these conversations is the othering that takes place when we are creating these outgroups. And I grew up in Boston. I bring a little bit of that into my writing. It was a very racist period. The very same way in which we created us and thems and stories then are playing out in the animals that I study now, and they're so divisive. And I think about the question of representing the minds or stories of other species. To me, it's all about imaginings. And I have a twin sister, and I always say to her, I can't even begin to understand what your inner world is like, let alone hardly my own. And so, as long as I can communicate that I'm just trying to evoke some empathy through these imaginings and what I know about the science, and then create the story that can hopefully try to dissolve some of these othering processes. So, I love the restoring idea.
And I hope, could you all hear what she said or part of what she said? Yes, the idea is a wildlife biologist working in restoring species, and that the recurring theme when you're bringing in these processes, we're going to restore grizzlies or we're going to restore fishers or whoever, is the othering, the us and them. They're different than us, and how this idea of imagining their reality can create empathy. Everything that you said was really quite eloquent, and I really want to just underscore that again, that imagination is our path to empathy, and with humans and non-humans a lot.
Yes, this gentleman here on the aisle. Yes.
Thanks for your thoughts. I'm really curious what you briefly mentioned form, and something that I'm going over, I'm curious about what your thoughts on is writing in English. Kimmer writes learning grammar dependency about English being rooted in capital, English being rooted in a preposition, subject, verb, object.
What an interesting question. So language, talking about the kind of root, what Kimmerer identifies as the root of the English language, which is rooted in capital, as you say, and then and how do we reconcile writing in that language? No?
Well, we're a little stuck, or I am at least, as a monolingual, mostly monolingual person. But one thing I do recommend is reading more and understanding more of what he's talking about how other languages are structured differently. And one of the great ways to do it, one of the greatest things I ever did was to take a translation class in which you did not necessarily have to know the other languages, but you're working on translating as best you can. And when you do so, you see how the actual syntax and how changing that syntax changes meaning, changes the soul of what you're saying, which is what you're bringing up, that we really are trapped in this syntax that we have. And the more that we can see, and poetry allows us a lot more leeway, right? A lot more room to bring those other ways of creating sentences, creating meaning into our work. But prose writers can do it as well. And we're here to learn, right? We're here to expand. Do you have thoughts, Laura?
I just want to say I love that question. Fascinating. And my only idea right now, I'd like to pursue this and think about it more probably for the rest of my life, but is to have a character who is trying to speak in different, like have a character in one of my novels actually take this on, because I like to invent characters who are taking on issues that I'm working through, and maybe start to rearrange language and sentences, and that be part of this novel, right? I don't know how else to address it quite yet, but fascinating.
For me, it has to do with poetry. So it has to do with the way, so I was a poet first, but the way my sentences are constructed very lyrically, and I'm always trying to create clouds of beauty in my work. And so that this kind of, it's almost like you enter into this field, and I want the description to kind of surround my readers. And for me, that's trying to explode the very linear kind of way that English is rendered often on the page. Thank you, Hemingway. Thank you, Hemingway, and thank you, Hemingway. He's too-edged for me. This idea for me, the way through is through poetry, through making language beautiful, and then it can be ferocious and kind, and all the kinds of other things. So that's how I try to do it.
Great question.
Other questions? Yes.
What do you guys think about hybrid mixing? Maybe trying to take the ideas that you have and then mixing them in with something that might attract more to the Gen Z zeitgeist. For example, Fallout. My generation goes crazy over it. What if you could mix Fallout with my side of the town?
Well, I think Laura Pritchett has done that.
Thank you.
Yes, you have.
I don't know if I have, but I've tried. I'd like that. Yeah.
Okay,
I want to.
talk more about your book. You know, Wildfire. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, a lot of energy lies in that space, and I don't know the answer to your question, but all I know is that's where my artistic gaze often lands, and like, what can I develop in that kind of way? It's a great question.
I guess what I was trying to say is that Laura in playing with Wildfire, she does this kind of, each chapter is kind of a different take. There's one chapter I remember that has, kind of is laid out in it's a triangle on the page? How is that?
It's a wedge.
It's a wedge. And then there's letters, and then there's the point of view of a mountain, so it's not graphic novel stuff. But it is trying to kind of look at form and how these forms can tell the story more authentically. And so I do think that writers are trying to do that. And I think Laura, is in particular working with that, and now writing a craft book on it, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
So none of us are graphic novelists, alas, but I'm sure there is somebody out there who's working on this.
I hope
Perhaps
many of you.
One of you.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'm gonna see if I can form it into a question. So bear with me, but thank you so much for this panel. It's really enjoying it. My background is in biology, conservation,
have any. I have no notion that that stuff is from a bygone era. I have a Substack called "A Woman's Places in the Wild," and that's exactly what it is. Is I like start talking about what happened this week, me and my dog in the forest, the bear coming up on the deck, which wildflowers are in bloom, and I just meditate on them. And usually what happens is after I've done this kind of description or meditation of what's going on, and I call them meditations on all things wild, then it turns into some kind of reflection for me. So I think that praising and wondering about the natural world is one of the most important sacred acts of this era. So,
All right. You have anything to add?
one more question. Okay, no more questions. Thank you so much.
wait, Sorry.
Over here.
I love the idea for a place in the West is first foods. So being native to this land right now is that's been one of our strongest recourses to what's happening in our environment is presenting our first foods, things that become sacred. It's a good place. It always seems to be a tool that we have to bring out to fight against whatever's happening, whatever's set to tear up this place. I just appreciate you doing that. It's exciting.
It's such a beautiful way to re-story, isn't it? It's such a beautiful way to re-story the land by bringing this forward again, saying, remember, remember, remember. I love that.
Thank you for that.
Okay, very last question. Because you're so cute. I'm gonna.
Just a quote by Robin Wall Kimmerer. For me, writing is an act of reciprocity with the world. It is what I can give back in return for everything that has been given to me.
Oh, that's
What a
such a
perfect
great way to end.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. You've been wonderful. Thank you very much.